What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Nick and Bush coming at you with our first official episode of DFS content. It's week one, ladies and gentlemen. We are getting into some real football. We don't have to talk about draft values, mention the word ADP or none of that shit. It's all wheels up. We're actually going to be able to watch football this Thursday. So what me and Nick are going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about Showdown Strategy, because on Thursday we're going to have Thursday Night Football. And I know a lot of you play Showdown DFS, where you basically build a lineup just on one game. And we're going to be talking about the strategy associated with that. And then we're going to also talk about some of our favorite plays and some of the decisions you might have to face when building your Showdown lineup this week. So Nick, how you doing today?
Yeah, man, doing good. This is, I love Redraft. I love Dynasty, but DFS is like my favorite type of fantasy sports, especially when it comes to football. I'm so excited. It feels weird, like the season's crept up on us because there's no preseason. It's like, all right, well, we're going to have some games now. And this first game is going to be sweet, but we'll get into it a little later. It's looking a little interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to hit the intro, and then we'll see you guys on the other side. All right. So as Nick mentioned, he's the DFS guy. Initially, when we first talked to each other and we were going to bring you on to the Fantasy Stock Exchange, it was to do DFS content because that's your kind of bread and butter. I'm the redraft guy. That's the way I like to play fantasy, but I do dabble with some DFS as well. So basically how we've kind of structured this show in terms of the strategy portion is we're going to think of like some common questions basically around Showdown Strategy. And then Nick, who is the more experienced DFS player of the two of us, is going to give kind of his thoughts, and then I'll give some of my thoughts after that. So the first question we got on tap here is, where do you start when you're first looking at a Showdown slate?
So obviously, just for a new player who maybe hasn't played much Showdown before, the main difference between a Showdown and a main slate is the Showdown is going to be a single game, and there's only 6 slots. Of those 6 slots, there's a captain position, and the captain position scores more. It's 1.5 fantasy points. They also cost a lot more. So we're working within a salary cap. So all of our decisions in DFS kind of have to be based around that salary cap. And we can't just play everyone we want all the time. You kind of just have to hone in on all the different edges and the potential ways to play a slate. You have to play at least one person from each team, which, you're pretty much always going to want to do that anyways if you kind of just look at strategy. But overall, the first thing I do when I look at a slate is I go through prices, just like with anything else. I'm going to look at prices, and then I'm going to go to a website that I trust and kind of go over ownership percentages. I'm going to look at their projections. I'm going to probably pop in a couple guys into a lineup building tool that can kind of pop out a few lineups, kind of see, because the thing is about a lineup builder is I like to build my lineups by hand. But when I put them into an optimizer, sometimes it just comes up with ideas that my brain doesn't think about. So I put them in there. I run a couple of different, groups, a couple of different rules. I put a couple of different things together, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But after I do that, then I can kind of see, where I think the general public is going to go as far as like who I think is going to be the highest owned, who I think is going to, be the highest paired and all that stuff. And then we just kind of go from there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And basically, I know a lot of novice DFS players, they go for the most like outlandish, likely outcomes sometimes, especially when we're playing GPP, which we'll clarify in a bit. Actually, let's do that right now. So do you want to go over just the differences between the two?
Yeah, GPP is just like going to be, it's a tournament, it's going to be it could be a large field, could be small field. And really, it's going to have that big prize pool at the top. And I guess the easiest way to really differentiate is to go to cash games. Cash games are going to have like 50% of the field winning and 50% of the field losing, whether that's a head-to-head, whether that's a double up, whether that's like some people count a 3-man, which would have a 1 out of 3 people winning as a cash game. But really, the main thing is that 50% of people win, 50% of people lose. A GPP would be where it's a tournament, and really it's like the top 10%, maybe the top 20% max are going to be the winners.
Yeah, for sure. And When you mentioned the captain position, we'll get into that right now. So when you're filling out your captain position, as you mentioned, you can do it with any position. It's not just limited to like quarterback or whatever. So what positions do you find most optimal to fill out your captain position in your roster?
Yeah, so I think when people first start with Showdown, and this was actually me too, and I think just the stats like from last year and the last couple of years bear this out, is people just go with quarterback. You know, like when they start with it, they're like, oh, quarterback's going to score the most points most likely, so let's put the quarterback in the captain position. The actual statistics, though, as far as like who has won and doesn't really bear that out. So 17.5% of the time, a quarterback in the captain position has won. So, I mean, 17.5% is, it's not tiny, but it's also, I feel like, much lower than what the field is playing. So if 50% of people are playing a quarterback in the captain position, but only 17.5% of the time they're winning, that's a huge edge for those of us that know that. You know, that's a 33% edge, you know, to kind of, without getting too nerdy, that's a really big edge in DFS that you don't find very often. So the places where I like to go is at running back and wide receiver in the captain position. So wide receiver actually has the highest percentage of chance to win in the captain position at 34%, and running back is 32%. So almost 70% of the time, it's going to be a running back or a running back or a wide receiver in the captain position, which I'm going to bank on every time. So 30% of the time I'll be wrong, but going back over the last couple of years, it's almost 70% of the time I'll be right. A lot of the time, I guess I'll just kind of go over the kicker and defense thing. It's a lot of the time I see if they don't play a quarterback in the captain position, people go with like a kicker or defense because you're trying to save money. Kickers and defense are cheap, you know, like, oh, these guys can go off at any time. You put them in the captain position and it might work out for you. Over the last 2 years, kickers have been in the captain spot less than 1% in the winning lineup, and defense has been in the winning lineup 6% of time. So yes, it does happen, but it is very small. If you are going to save money in the captain spot, look at like a third wide receiver, maybe even a fourth wide receiver. Do not look at the kicker and defense. It's just not likely to win.
Yeah, and basically you kind of touched on it already, but what kind of build are you looking for with your choice of captain as well?
Yeah, so with wide receiver, I would say this is the main correlation is huge in DFS. You know, in redraft, we're just trying to take whatever players, you know, we're trying to draft well, and then correlation doesn't matter as much unless you're in like a really, you know, high stakes, high upside kind of thing. Then maybe you want to stack. But if you play a wide receiver in the captain position, for sure, I mean, this might seem obvious, but you want their quarterback to go with them almost always. So a wide receiver in the captain position, 76% of the time that they won, they had they're also their quarterback. So only 23% of the time they did not have that quarterback. So, I mean, obviously you can play a wide receiver in the captain position without their quarterback and win, but it's not as likely. Usually, if you're going to play like a quarterback in the captain position, not usually, you always want to have at least 2 of his targets. Really, anytime that I play a quarterback in Showdown, I'm going to have 2 of their targets just because if I'm going to be spending the money on a quarterback, I'm thinking they're going to go off. That's just kind of how it's got to be. If you think about GPPs, I mean, being unique when there's only one game to choose from is super hard. It's really hard. So I'll kind of get into leaving salary on the table, but yeah, just you have to have a top range outcome. So if you're going to play a quarterback, you probably want 2 of their players. Just to go over some kind of quick stats as far as like with roster construction based off the captain position. So only 5% of winning lineups used a naked captain. So meaning like they played, and I actually remember the game. It was they played Devontae Adams as the only Packer on that lineup, and he was in their captain position. And then there was 5 players from the other team, and that's the only time that has ever worked in a Showdown slate, was that you had like a captain without any of his other players, so like naked captain. So that was the only time that happened. 10% of the time you have a 2-4 construction, so like a captain and 1 of his players, and then 4 of the other players. 34% of the times they win, it's a 3-3 construction, and 34% of the time it's a 4-2 construction. So like that's kind of the more likely outcome, is like when you have a captain, you probably want to pair him with 2 of his teammates against 3 of the opposing team, or pair him with 3 of his teammates and 2 of the opposing team.
Yeah, and I see you have 5-1 construction there listed as well. So specifically with this slate, we'll get into it later. The Thursday slate that's happening, I would say generally most people would consider the Chiefs to be a pretty heavy favorite in this game. So maybe talk about 5-1 construction from that perspective specifically this week.
Oh yeah, 100%. So 5-1 construction is like the onslaught, the opposite of the naked captain. And that actually wins at 17.5% of the time. So going all in on a favorite actually can be extremely profitable. I would think, like, going back to last year, actually a lot of the time that the 5-1 strategy worked was betting on the underdog, like going with an onslaught on the underdog. And that was when it would pay off because no one else would be on it. You played the whole squad of the underdog and then one of the team that was supposed to win. And it's football, it's this oblong leather object that bounces a million different ways and we just don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, that's some victories. Also just betting on teams like the Chiefs tonight, potentially. So you could take that either way. Maybe you decide to kind of eat the chalk, as it said, and just play an onslaught of Chiefs and kind of bank on maybe hitting that 17.5% chance. The problem with that is, I would say it's basically a guarantee that if you do a Chiefs onslaught tonight and you say have a top 1% lineup, you're going to be chopping whatever money you win with probably 500 to 1,000 other people, maybe more, because I think that's what everyone's trying to do. If you say did a 5-1 for the Texans, I don't think anyone's going to do it. The thing is I think it's probably like a less than 5% chance, maybe less, that the Texans actually have that outcome. So, I mean, it's kind of up to you on how you want to play that.
Yeah, so take that advice for what you will. Nick basically told you if you're a boomer bust, high risk player, you want to go an onslaught of Texans, you can do it, and it's probably going to be a contrarian play, and not a lot of people are going to do it. And if it does hit, you're probably going to win some money doing it. So we touched on this earlier, but Showdown Cash versus Showdown Gpp, what's kind of the difference as compared to like Sunday Cash and Sunday GPP?
Yeah. So on Sundays, I love to play cash and tournaments. I like to mix both of them. I put most of my money into cash so that I can kind of have a nice baseline and, that 50-50, like we talked about earlier, the head-to-heads, all that stuff, and then I pick some game placement at some point in the season. We'll go over the right way to kind of pick games, but I pick some good tournaments. I pick my spots and all that, but when it comes to showdown slates, I don't play any cash. I'm very selective with what I am going to play anyways. Like, so I got a slate tonight. I'm not going to have much action because I just don't really like the slate even for tournaments. But for overall cash games of Showdown, like, I just never play it because the variance is so high. There is so many ways that a game can go. And say you have Clyde Edwards-Helaire in your lineup and everyone's kind of thinking tonight, like, oh yeah, he's going to have a good game. If the Texans are doing well, he'll probably score 16 to 18 points. And it'll go great. He seems like a really safe play. Well, if Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first quarter, like if something happens, there's basically no coming back from if he doesn't play well. Whereas in like a Sunday main slate, you can still cash if one of your guys goes out for like 8 points or 9 points, and you can come back from it. On a showdown, there is no coming back from it, and there's not as much skill because in a single game, there's just so many different ways. Like, we have less good plays to pick from. We have to kind of play more crappy plays. It's just I would stay away from cash and showdown pretty much almost entirely. That would be
I 100% do, because like you said, there's so many different ways it can break. And I'm the way I think of fantasy football, I think about it from a very logical perspective. So I'm not trying to play guys who are in bad matchups. And a lot of the times that's what ends up happening because it's a showdown. If you spend up on a guy and he underperforms, you're screwed. Like, you're pretty much not coming back from that, as you mentioned. And cash games, like on Sundays, it's usually all about like floor and like projectable like outputs. Like, that's why you load up on your like workhorse running backs and all that stuff. And you basically just need a lot to go right to win at a cash game based on logical expectations. And chances are, if you have those logical expectations about how you think a game would go, like generally speaking, most people think, oh, the Chiefs are going to bury the Texans on Thursday. If everyone else is thinking that, which most people are, and they load up on Chiefs and expensive ones, they play the Kelseys, the Hills and the Mahomes, if that actually hits, as you mentioned, like a lot of people will have that because that's what the general public perceives the outcome to be. So I personally am much better at playing cash games. Like I do much better at it on Sundays because that's how I think about fantasy. So, and the reason I'm not very good at this at showdown slates with GPP is because it requires outside the box thinking as well as some like contrarian plays that my logical brain just can't handle. So, any other things you want to like talk about before we kind of missed? Yeah, like we kind of went in a little wacky order, but before we get to like this specific slate that we have.
Yeah, so I guess kind of the first difference. So we've been talking DraftKings. With FanDuel, you have an MVP instead of a captain. It's similar. It's kind of similar, but you actually pick one less person on FanDuel. It's like it's a 5-pick thing. It's kind of weird. And the money over there, just like with always with FanDuel, is you have so much more money. So I think it's fun. It also makes the outcome, it's just different. You know, you've got a lot of money to spend. You can fit the studs, and it kind of makes, I guess, being contrarian a little bit easier because you know everybody's just going to fit the studs, but you're going to lose more because the studs are studs for a reason, you know? So that's something I would say with FanDuel. Also, over the last 2 years, over 90% of GPP winners have used $49,600 or less. So they've left at least $400 on the table in Showdown. That's 90% of the time. So if that says anything, that's a lot. That's a huge percentage. Just leave $400 on the table. It'll differentiate your lineup. And I guess the last thing I'll go over that is important to me when I build lineups is the defense and kicker thing that I kind of alluded to earlier. So 60% of winning lineups had 0 defenses. This isn't in the captain spot. This is like overall 0 defenses. 38% had 1 defense and only 1.75% had 2. So like never play 2 defenses. That should seem obvious. Like you don't want to play a defense against a defense, but even playing 1 defense, that's, less than 40% chance. So, I mean, you can do it. And obviously a lot of teams win with 1, but just stay away from 2. Your odds are actually better with 0. And then when it comes to kickers, 64% of the teams that won, they had 0 kickers. 32% had 1 and 3.5% had 2. So I guess a lot of teams just go 2 kickers for some reason. It's because they're cheap. They can get studs outside of them, but just think about it. The upside on playing 2 kickers against each other is just your chances of winning are basically nil. And 0 kickers is just usually the move too with GPPs.
Yeah, for sure. Because people, like as you mentioned, people do try and cheap out. They're like, oh, I want to get Tyreek, Travis Kelce, and Patrick Mahomes all in my lineup, so I need to play Harrison Butker. I need to play Kaimi Fairbairn or whatever, because if I don't, play, we'll get into some guys in a second who you can play instead of guys like that, but just play a third, fourth receiver or a backup running back, because you're better off doing that. It's more likely to pay off. Plus their ownership percentages, I'd imagine, will probably also be lower as well. So you mentioned, actually, I just wanted to touch on one more thing. You mentioned it already. The cash on the table thing for beginners, especially, they feel obligated to like make sure they have $0 left or make sure they have $100 left. Like don't with Showdown, especially, do not focus on that, because I don't know what percentage of people you say are probably focusing on that. 50% of people. And if you're not doing that, then you're already differentiating yourself. Yeah,
so, for sure. I mean, it's definitely, people have been getting sharper, but yes, in general, I would say that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into this slate in terms of like who we like to play and kind of just our thoughts overall on the slate.
All right. Yeah. Houston, Kansas City on an NFL level is an incredible game. I'm super stoked for the first game of the year. I mean, it's potential for, fireworks, potential just for seeing 2 young quarterbacks that both just got paid, getting to kind of show off after the playoffs last year that were the wildest game of all time, was the Texans-Kansas City game in the playoffs last year when the Kansas City got down 21-0 and then the blocked punt. And it was just, I've never seen anything like it. So it's exciting kind of coming into this year. What people most likely will be doing, we've kind of already talked about, either a Kansas City onslaught or a shootout, and those are the most likely outcomes. So I guess you just kind of need to decide if you want to go with those or if you're, trying to be different, kind of like we discussed before. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that part so far?
No, I do think that the general public is going to be thinking those are the two most likely outcomes. One, like kind of, I don't know if we want to be playing narrative street with DFS because it's mostly like statistics based, but the first game of the year tends to be sloppy, which I've noticed over the last couple of years. If you remember last year with the Bears and the Packers game was really like pretty low scoring game and it was kind of sloppy football. Same goes for 2 years ago between the Falcons and the Eagles. Same exact kind of thing. And especially this year when there was no preseason and it was kind of like a limited offseason, there's a chance, and maybe the Chiefs are an exception to this because they have so much continuity, but there's a chance both teams kind of get out to like a rough start and they're trying to get their footing on offense by like midway through the third quarter, and then things start picking up. But the opposite is also true. What happens if that's the defense is being like that and they're blowing coverages left and right, and you just get a bunch of broken plays out of it? So again, just something to keep in mind with the first game of the year.
Yeah, I actually like that take. I think it's something to look at if you're playing multiple lineups, is potentially building something related to if it's the game slows down and say they've got like a slugfest where we got to see David Johnson pounding the rock with Daryl Williams or something like that. That has potential to happen. It really does. I don't think it's likely, but it has potential. Speaking of kind of upside, really just savings plays, Daryl Williams is the main guy that comes to my mind for this slate. We talked about Demarcus Robinson a little bit earlier, but Daryl Williams at 1,800 is by far the cheapest play that has potential to kind of change the whole slate. I mean, we're looking at Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who is a rookie who I love. I think he's great. I think he's going to be awesome this year. But Daryl Williams has somehow beat out DeAndre Washington. He's made it through training camp as kind of like the backup guy. And this could be something where they just play him more than we think he will. Maybe he luck boxes into a couple touchdowns. Maybe he actually gets more playing time than any of us are anticipating because Clyde's a rookie. It's week 1 and he is $1,800. DraftKings was anticipating DeAndre Washington being the backup. DeAndre Washington is $4,000. They did not think that Daryl Williams was going to be in this spot. So I think that is a potential place that you can capitalize. So it's just a big decision. I mean, if you want to get in guys like Mahomes, if you want to get in guys like Watson, if you want to get them playing with Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce, you need a guy like Daryl Williams who you just kind of need to take a shot on. And at $1,800, he needs if he gets you like 12, 13, 14 points, like you're pretty happy and you're still in the game.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I think the most 2020 thing of all time would be if Clyde Edwards-Helaire busts off like a huge run and gets tackled at the 2-yard line and Daryl Williams comes into the game and takes the touchdown away. I think that'd be just so classic. And You mentioned Demarcus Robinson on PFF. If anyone has PFF out there, PFF actually does cornerback and receiver matchups like weekly, and they talk about like kind of who has the advantage, what the percentage point chances of the advantage. So as of right now, currently Tyreek Hill has the best advantage over Bradley Roby just because Tyreek Hill is so good. But in terms of the cheaper plays, Demarcus Robinson, who's only 2,200 on DraftKings currently, is projected to go up against Lonnie Johnson, who's primarily on the right side, and he had one of the worst PFF grades of all the corners last year. He was a rookie corner from Kentucky. And Sammy Watkins also on Vernon Hargraves. I'm a Tampa Bay Bucks fan. I saw how bad Vernon Hargraves was for so long. And I usually just played Where's Waldo with Vernon Hargraves in DFS. I was like, okay, who's Vernon guarding this week? I'm playing them in DFS. So, and also we know how good Sammy Watkins is in week 1. So it's another narrative you can take to the bank there. I think the play is not to play Hardman and play Hill. I think to fade the top 2 receivers, in my opinion, that's going to be my approach this week, is to fade Hill and Hardman and play those lower end receivers on the Chiefs and potentially Kelce if you can fit him into your lineup as well.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about a main slate, we are never talking about a wide receiver 3, a wide receiver 4. And that's the kind of fun in a showdown slate, is that we get to dig deep. We get to take our dynasty, our redraft roots, and we get to talk about guys like Demarcus Robinson, like Daryl Williams, kind of guys that maybe you're just standard, DFS players just not really going to talk about. Yeah, so we kind of alluded earlier to the decision you have to make between quarterbacks and if you're going to play them. Patrick Mahomes is, I mean, he's the best player in the NFL, if not, for sure the best quarterback, if not the best player. And he's going to be owned at probably 90% across the board in really every showdown tournament tonight, I would say, and for a good reason. So I would say the biggest decision you're going to have to make tonight is if you're going to play Mahomes. And then after that, it's if you're going to play Watson. Like those are going to be the decisions on if you want to play them together, if you want to try and fade Mahomes and be part of the 10% that's not playing him. The most likely outcome is that Mahomes probably scores more than anyone else tonight. So it's hard to fade him, but at 90% ownership, I would say that, it's his potential to fail at that. I don't know. I think it's up in the air. That's just a decision you're going to have to make. I haven't even made it myself yet on if I want to fade him or if I want to play him, but he's a great play. And Deshaun Watson, I would say also is a great play. Kansas City, I think they definitely have a better defense than the Texans do. But Deshaun is very good at putting his team on his back and then battling it out. So I could see if, say, Patrick gets the Chiefs on the board and Watson starts battling back because he's just kind of like a fighter, that's a guy that you might end up needing, both of them. But, Daryl Williams is going to have to be a play you probably make if you want these guys, or Demarcus Robinson. And then it's like, if those guys don't hit, then you having both quarterbacks doesn't work anyways. So there's just a lot of decisions I would say to be made there. Also, you had alluded to the Sammy and mecole thing. I'm 100% on board with you. I think Sammy Watkins is the play. Mecole, I think, will be higher owned because he's $600 cheaper, as well as Sammy Watkins is the wide receiver too. In training camp, it's been clear. That's all they talk about, is that Sammy is the guy, and Sammy has huge weeks when he has huge weeks. We want to be catching that lightning in the bottle rather than missing out on it. And mecole, we just haven't fully seen it yet. Like, I love his talent, but we haven't seen it in the way that we have from Sammy Watkins, even though Sammy Watkins has been a disappointment generally over his career. I would say the last places you kind of want to look, in my opinion, that you need to kind of decide about is the Texans wide receivers. Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks are similar, as far as the general outlook. I like Will Fuller a lot more as a player, but that might seem obvious. Brandon Cooks is going to have less ownership than Will Fuller. Will Fuller is more expensive. Brandon Cooks, I did see an alert actually just shortly that he is not practicing today, which is concerning just kind of based on Brandon Cooks' injury history, which could be setting the table for my guy, who I have not shared with anyone yet, except for Bush earlier, is Randall Cobb. And you guys are lucky I'm dropping this nugget for you, because Randall Cobb is going to be my guy that I'm probably going all in on. So either I'm winning all the money or I'm losing all the money. It's okay. But I think Randall Cobb is in play because Bill O'Brien is an idiot. Also because they paid him a bunch of money and they brought in Brandon Cooks, and now they have Will Fuller and they got rid of DeAndre Hopkins. So we just have no clue what they're going to do as far as the Texans go. So, I think Randall Cobb is just as good a bet as any, especially with his price. And, you can fit all the guys when you play Randall Cobb. If you want to play Daryl Williams, you can get really wild with it and go from there.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit of the different mind frame than you. I understand the Randall Cobb logic. My thinking is he's going to see a lot of Honey Badger, and I don't want anything to do with that matchup. So based on the matchups that PFF projects, they have Will Fuller against Rashad Fenton, who I think is the weak link of the Chiefs cornerback unit, and they have Brandon Cooks going against Charvarius Ward, who is actually probably their best outside corner. So if I'm going to play a Texans receiver and in the lineup I currently built, I do have Will Fuller in it. And I think if Cooks is limited in any way, plus it's just a new offense and it's the first week of the season, I do think I could see, and you mentioned it with Watkins, when he blows, he blows. Same goes for Will Fuller. When Will Fuller blows, he goes off. And I would suggest getting a guy like that, not necessarily those guys this week, but in general, those type of boomer bust players are awesome for your captain slot. The Amari Coopers, the Mike Evans type guys, those are the type of dudes that go off consistently. And that's what you want in your captain slot because you get 1.5x the points.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, to win, really, almost always you're going to need the highest scoring guy from the slate in your captain slot. That's just how it's going to be, really, almost always. I say almost because there is exceptions, but it's 98% of the time the highest scoring guy. So in a night like tonight, if you want to try and force Patrick Mahomes into the captain slot and pair him with a couple of his cheap wide receivers, if you want to go contrarian and force Deshaun Watson into that slot. If I'm going with the Texans, though, my last kind of bit of advice is I would play a Texans wide receiver in the captain spot and Deshaun Watson in the flex. If I'm going all in on the Chiefs, I'm most likely going to be playing Patrick Mahomes in the captain spot because he will most likely be their highest scoring player. And then kind of pairing him with some of those lower dollar guys. And that's kind of just, I mean, do with it what you will. Try out some optimizers out there, some lineup builders, see what they're spitting out, check out some projections, check out ownership percentages. But that's kind of my basic read here a couple nights till game day.
Yep. I'm super fucking excited, man. I'm so excited for football to be played. We've all been waiting since February to see a football game, right? So, and maybe you're watching Navy football in the college game. Like, I'm not watching college football until, like, I watched a bit of the BYU game the other day, but that's about all I can take before I can get some real football. And the Chiefs Texans definitely qualifies as some real football. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know it was a little statistic and nerdy, but we're only going to be doing the Showdown slate for this week because we just need some kind of filler episodes before we get into our full like season schedule. And the video that dropped yesterday, if you guys want to go check that out, me and Danny did some bold predictions. We talked about how the schedule for the season is going to go when we're talking about waivers, when we're doing start sit, all that kind of stuff. Nick and I will see you guys on Saturday mornings with our DFS picks of the week. And as I mentioned, guys, like this video if you enjoyed it. Comment down below any of your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the bell icon because we post videos pretty much every day. So without further ado, guys, take it easy and enjoy your Wednesday.